Okay, welcome to the Minitex webinar series, Engaging with Critical Cataloging, Past and Present. My name is Alyssa Becknell, and I will be your webinar host today. And this webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to YouTube after we do some captioning work. There will be a Q&A at the end of the presentation, so you can feel free to put your questions in the chat as they arise, and we'll make sure to get to them later. This webinar series is an exploration of Library of Congress subject authority work. And you're going to hear about this work from the perspective of critical catalogers who are engaged in this work. And you'll learn about historic projects and people from Minnesota's radical cataloging history past. This series is trying to find the connections between past and present as we learn about Library of Congress subject authority work. Here we go.
There we go.
Violet is a cataloging and metadata librarian at Northwestern University's Galtier Health Sciences Library. She's the creator of the Cataloging Lab, a wiki that's designed to encourage collaboration in library metadata. She's also the co-coordinator of the Subject Authority Cooperative Medical Funnel and publishes a monthly roundup of new resources called the Crit Cat Knit. Today, she is going to talk about how cataloging librarians are working together to improve Library of Congress subject headings and rethinking their approach to subject access. So you'll learn more about subject authority cooperative work through the Program for Cooperative Cataloging, and she'll introduce you to the medical funnel, LIEPA funnel, and the gender and sexuality funnel to help you understand how you can get involved in ensuring better access to library resources about disability and medicine and health. Okay, I'm going to turn things over to Violet now.
All right, we're in business. So I knew Alyssa was going to introduce me, but I wanted this just a slide just to get me oriented. Just a huge thanks to Alyssa for having me. This whole webinar series has been really exciting so far. I'm looking forward to the future presentations. Please tune in if you haven't, register for these important sessions to show that there's a lot of interest in this topic, and that these presenters are doing such a great job in sharing this. And especially a big thanks to Minitex, who does a lot of really important work. And we're all hoping that the Minnesota State Legislature will step up to fund it appropriately in a time where funding is imperiled. So thank you again. Glad to be here. So today I'm going to be talking about working together to improve disability and medical subject headings. There's a lot to talk about. I might go through it a little bit too fast, but I'm going to try not to, because I do want to give plenty of time for us to talk at the end and have plenty of time for questions. So thanks, everyone. I'm really excited about your questions. I'm preemptorily excited about your questions. Thanks. All right, so I'm going to dive right in with this whole problems with LCSH. And, a lot of us have heard this before, and so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I do want to just set this stage. There's a lot of problems with LCSH, and we've talked about it a lot over the last few, I don't know, decades or so. And you've heard about that in the presentation so far in the webinar, and we'll just sort of briefly recap them here to say, some of it, there's a lot has to do with the inconsistency of it, which is sort of closely tied to the fact that it's very complex and it's huge. There's hundreds of thousands of terms. And there's generally a small staff that are working with it, and it's been going on since 1897. So there's a lot of complexity involved in that system. It's slow to change. We know that is sort of a feature in some ways and not necessarily a bug. It's slow to change to some extent on purpose, because there wants to be LC wants to ensure that there's sort of a consensus around terminology that's evidenced by the literary warrant, and not necessarily that we're chasing down the latest terminology. But that does lead to some pretty significant problems with being slow to change, as we all know, that there's lots that needs to change and needs to have changed a few years ago, and we're still working on those. Systemic bias, we've talked a lot about this, and we'll continue talking about this. About how this structure is sort of I talk about it as a colonial product. It comes out of course, late 19th century white American standpoint, but it's also a colonial project in that it continues to this day to reinforce a particular set of views that can be, pretty concretely described as a colonial perspective. So we know about the systemic bias, and I'm not going to go on and on about it because we've heard all about it. So let's move on about thinking about how LCSH is controlled. It's controlled entirely by the Library of Congress. So I'll say that it's controlled by a small group of people within LC. That group of people is called, well, the division that runs the vocabulary is PTCP. If you hear that acronym, it's the Policy Training and Cooperative Programs Division. Very nice people working there. There's been some staff turnover, so lots of really great things have happened lately. But it is a small group of people. That is sort of offset by the fact that there is input received by catalogers throughout LC. But still, it's a small group of people working in one building, and so it's hard for them to represent the entirety of human subjects by just one group of people. And I did want to say that it is, of course, controlled by the Library of Congress. We know that that's a governmental agency. It is subject to, sorry, that's a pun, subject to the whims of the US government and the administration. Even though it is part of the legislative branch, it's still, subject to some of the edicts of the executive branch and sort of the way that it's setting the tone for the government. That most recently was exemplified by the recent LCSH changes to from Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America, and from Mount Denali to Mount McKinley. If you're interested in that, I wrote a blog post about it, sort of talking about how those changes were disappointingly fast-tracked through LCSH. I won't get too far into it at this point, would point you to the blog post, but if you're interested in making some local changes, that's a great place to start in your own local catalog. So with laying all that out, let's talk about some solutions, or at least one solution that we can see. And one solution is cooperative revisions. So saying that we know that there's lots of problems within LCSH and other LC vocabularies and classification, but we can work together to improve it. And there's actually structures in place that are encouraging us to work together to improve it. So this is the acronym slide where there's a lot of acronyms to sort of set you up to understand sort of where we're coming from. PCC, if that's a term you've heard before, it's the Program for Cooperative Cataloging. And a lot of people think PCC is run by LC or is LC's work, and it really isn't. I mean, it's administratively helped by the LC, and the website is hosted on LC website, but really PCC is us. It's catalogers from around the world. It's people doing this work to improve cataloging for everyone who uses these structures that we're talking about. So PCC does things like policy statements. They create guidelines. They create training, and they do more. I'm in my spare time. I'm on the advisory committee for DEI for PCC. So we've done a lot of work trying to push cataloging, these cooperative cataloging standards to become more inclusive, equitable, and diverse. While we can still say that. So PCC has 4 components underneath it, and we won't get into any of these except for SACO. We'll just get into one of them, but just so that you know the 4 components, they are NACO, the Name Authority Cooperative, which maintains and helps train people to maintain the name authority file. SACO, the Subject Authority Cooperative, which is what we'll be talking about today. There's also BibCo, Bibliographic Cooperative, to maintain really high standards for bibliographic records. And then there's CONSER, the Cooperative Online Serials Program, and they focus on those serials, bibliographic records that are really hardcore, like really, really good serials records. So if you see those, like, bless the people who work for CONSER. Today we'll be talking about SACO. So through SACO, anyone in this room, any of you can make proposals for revisions to LCSH, the subject headings, and the other vocabularies. So genre form terms, demographic group terms, medium performance terms for music, and Library of Congress classification. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to focus on LCSH, but just so you know, the process is the same for any of these vocabularies. All right, I'm going to move on and talk about, so we have the SACO program. And so SACO membership, you can be a part of SACO either through your institution or through a funnel. And so institutional SACO membership tends to be something that is for large libraries, generally academic libraries. So your Harvards, your Yales, your University of Californias, the big ones at least. SACO membership is, they usually have enough librarians to do internal training, and they have sort of the, capacity, SACO members have capacity to do sort of a lot of subject heading work, right? But there's also a way into SACO without being a part of that large institution. And if that's someone who's you, then I would love to introduce you to the idea of a SACO funnel. SACO funnels are informal groups of people working together to improve LC vocabularies. That's the simplest way I can put it, and it's very true. It's really, there's no formal obligation of, if you want to join a SACO funnel, if that's of interest to you, you are absolutely welcome in. You don't have to have any particular, you don't have to have an MLIS degree, you don't have to have a particular amount of cataloging knowledge, you don't have to have, and there's no formal obligations. What you have to have is an interest in improving LC vocabularies. And hopefully if you're here or you're watching this recording, you have that interest in improving our vocabularies. So let's talk about the work of at least some of the SACO funnels. So this is an incomplete list of SACO funnels that are currently running. As you can see, it's a very varied list. So there are things such as topics lists. So African American funnel, Africana, and art and theology. Those are all examples of subject-based funnels. So whatever sort of work you're working on in whatever sort of institution, if your resource is related to any of these topics, you're welcome to approach the SACO funnel or become a part of the SACO funnel for those topics. There's also institution-based funnels. So for example, California State University, they get together and there's other specific institutions that have their own funnel. There's also geographically based funnels. So for example, you see Canada and Oklahoma on here. And so those are people who have a geographic contribution, or they have a geographic similar, they're all part of the same geographic area, and they came together to talk about how to improve LCSH together through a funnel. So that's the only thing that they have in common, that they wanted to join a funnel and make things happen. And there's also a few here that are sort of a little bit more special. So there's FAST, the faceted terminology funnel, so they have an interest in that. Of course, there's languages, so the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean funnel does a lot of really important work. Today, I'll talk a little bit about the work of a few of these. So of course, I'll talk about the medical funnel, which is, I'm the co-chair of that, and there's a couple people in the room who are members of the medical funnel, so I hope they'll chime in as well. I'll also talk a little bit about the LIPA funnel, the Latin American Indigenous Peoples of the Americas, and I'll also talk a little bit about the gender and sexuality funnel, but just so you know that there's a lot of work going on, and if any of these sort of are interesting to you in terms of your professional responsibilities, I would really encourage you to reach out to folks. The chairs of the funnels are uniformly terrific and excited to get new members in. So please do see this as an invitation. So I'm going to talk today about the medical funnel, just sort of as a sample of what the sort of things that a funnel does. So this is one of numerous funnels that have started within the last few years. So the gender and sexuality funnel is new as of, I think, 2023 or 2024, maybe 2023. The occult funnel is also a newer one. And so these have sort of started, and I think especially after the uprising, after the murder of George Floyd, there's sort of a response to the social justice interest in changing cataloging and librarianship in general. So definitely the medical funnel is one of these newer ones. So we've been around for about 2 years, still getting our, our wherewithal, trying to figure out what we're doing. But we've made some great strides so far, and I'm here to tell you about that. So the goals of the medical funnel, when we set this up, our goals are accurate, up-to-date, culturally sensitive, and respectful terminology in the service of enhancing access to library resources. So we're not just doing this just to be politically correct or whatever. We're doing this because we really think that this is going to improve access to library resources. It's going to use terminology that people are actually looking for. One of our goals is bringing together medical and generalist library workers. So not just people who work in medical librarians, but also people who work in regular libraries or archives, but have an interest for whatever reason in medicine, health, or disability and want to improve those subject headings. One of our goals is participation from library workers with a range of work and life experiences, including newer members of the profession and those without medical backgrounds. I have so many times heard people say, "Oh, I don't have, I don't know anything about medicine, but I'd like to help." And I'm like, "Oh no, this is perfect for you." I don't have a medical background. I am figuring things out as I go. That's not really necessary for the type of work that we do. It's really more of a library research situation where we need that sort of expertise. And I guarantee everyone in this room has that expertise. We also are really interested in making sure that there's transparency in classification work and making all of the resources that we do, all of our documentation is up online for anybody to see. And all of our resources are also available online for people to see. So that's a big key goal for us, and that I think we've been very successful at. Something we've been a little maybe less successful at so far is coordination between the Library of Congress and NLM. So we are unique in the medical funnel because we handle both LC vocabularies, which all the SACO funnels do, but we actually do something in addition to that. We work with the National Library of Medicine's MESH, the medical subject headings, and the NLM classification. So that's unique among SACO funnels, and something that we're, striving to do. So if we improve something in one vocabulary, we often look to the other one to say, how is, is this in a good shape in the other one? Can we use this other one as an example, or should we improve this other one as well? So we're working on, sort of trying to figure out ways to improve coordination between LC and NLM. So far, that means that there's just a few people who are experts in both, coming to these meetings. We're always looking for ways to sort of make this a little bit more reciprocal, and making sure that that these funnels are funnels in ways that they are not necessarily sharing information. They're maybe siloed, and we want to sort of try to make that a little bit more of a sharing cooperative process. All right, so I'm going to talk about what we've done so far. And again, we've just started in 2 years, so this is what we've been able to do in 2 years. And along with all the administrative, setting up Google Drives and all that. So what we've actually been able to accomplish is within LCSH, we've revised the term cerebral palsied to people with cerebral palsy. And we've done a few other things with that people-oriented language, people-first language within LCSH. So for example, paralytics to people with paralysis. So we're not necessarily going through and doing the entire there's some inconsistency, especially within LCSH, of people first versus disability first language. We're not going to go through and systematically do that, but there's terminology such as cerebral palsied is just not something that's people are going to be looking for, and it's just not acceptable terminology anymore. So we wanted to make sure that those were priorities for us. Recently, we put forward a proposal to add self-managed abortion. It's a very hot topic, and so that is in progress. That is on, I think, a tentative list for June, I want to say. And so we're hoping that that gets approved. We're expecting that to be approved. Over in medical, in MESH, we put a proposal to revise criminal abortion to illegal abortion to, sort of say, there was nothing else in the medical subject headings that said criminal. And so why did criminal need to be in front of abortion? That was a weird thing. And so illegal is a little bit more descriptive of the fact that it's an act and not someone who's a criminal doing this health care service. And then also within LCSH and MESH, we had a big project of over 100 headings that we revised. And within LCSH, we were able to revise the old term hearing impaired to hard of hearing people. And that's something that every single organization for deaf and hard of hearing people across the world that uses English no longer used hearing impaired, and they had for a long time used hard of hearing. And so that was something that was sort of long overdue in LCSH, and I think it hadn't been done just because it was a big project. And so that was really satisfying to get that done, while at the same time we also revised the term deaf to deaf people, just because we were in there anyway and might as well fix that up. In MESH, unfortunately, they didn't take our advice. So instead of hard of hearing people, they used a term persons with hearing disabilities. And that is not the term that we suggested. And we think that they chose that term because it is similar in pattern to other disability terms that they have, but it's not a great term according to our research, because many people who are deaf or hard of hearing don't necessarily think that they have a disability. So we were disappointed that they went with that term, but it is better than the old term, which was hearing impaired. So we'll take what we can get. We'll make small improvements and work towards getting things even better in the future. So that's just some of the things we've been able to accomplish so far. And I'll talk about what we're working on now and is in progress right now. And some of these are in varying stages. So investigating is more like we're sort of still at the research stage, and revising is sort of where we've made some, we're in communication with folks. So LCSH, we're investigating the LCSH mentally ill. We're trying to find a good alternative for that. That might be people with mental illness. It might be something else. We're sort of looking at our at resources to see what sort of terminology is most frequently being used right now. What's the literary warrant out there? LCSH, we're investigating, there's an LCSH, which is really a bummer. It's called medical telematics, and that essentially means virtual healthcare or remote healthcare, right? The things that we do with our doctor online. And so the term medical telematics is just not something that people are using. And so we're trying to figure out how we can revise that terminology to be a little bit clearer to folks. And it would be something that someone would understand as a term that is relevant to today's society. So within both LCSH and MESH, we've done some work for revising Asperger's syndrome, which is a diagnosis that has not been used at least in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, DSM, since 2013. We know there's still people using it, but it's been about 12 years since it has no longer been a valid diagnosis. There's some movement towards, I believe the terminology that was agreed upon, and I'm not 100% sure, is autism with lower support needs. Don't quote me on that. We're still working on that. We've been talking with LC about that. I think it's a little bit slow. And then we're also planning on making a proposal in MESH for that. And LC and SH and MESH investigating the terms battered women, battered children, and battered men, thinking about different terminology that we might want to use for that. And then in LCSH and MESH, we're going to be planning on doing a lot more work with the gender and sexuality funnel, especially on reproductive rights. So that self-managed abortion proposal that is in process now, that came from the gender and sexuality funnel. And we have been having cooperative meetings with them. So really excited about the work that we're able to do with them. They're doing really terrific work on a lot of topics relating to, of course, gender and sexuality. And so they're kind of a big powerhouse and doing a lot of work. So it's exciting to see what they're doing, and it's exciting to partner with them on this important work. Just to briefly talk about how we do this work. So like, how do we decide what to do, right? So suggestions come from emails from medical librarians, a lot like people who are working with these terms quite a bit in PubMed or in library catalogs. They come from other funnels. So other funnels might have things suggested to them, and we might say, oh, we can take that on. Or we might come across a term that we think, oh, this is perfect for this other funnel to work with, and hopefully and sort of pass that on. More frequently, that suggestion comes from them to us. And so we've been lucky to have a lot of people interested to say, this is maybe a problem that you want to look into. And so we're excited when they are suggesting those. We also have a crowdsourced list of problem headings. I actually just got a new list. I just got a new suggestion for the problem headings form today. And somebody suggested, I think that right now there's an LCSH for X-linked mental retardation. And they had a suggestion to change this to X-linked intellectual disability. So that's something that it's a great suggestion. I think many of the mental retardation LCSH terms were revised, and that might have been one that either got slipped or it is still used within the medical terminology. So we'll have to do some research there to find out, is X-linked intellectual disability something that's being used in the literature right now, and should we go ahead and make a proposal to change the heading over to that? So that's something that's really exciting to see something come in, a request, and it sounds like a great topic for us to research. And suggestions, I'm saying it comes from you, question mark, because we are really hoping that people listening to this webinar would have maybe interesting suggestions about what we should research next. Like we were really excited to hear your ideas. We can't always run with them. We do have sort of limitations on what we can do, just because we're a limited amount of people. So to talk about, we take on projects that are, of course, within the scope of health, medicine, and disability. It's a big scope, but it does, there is some that is outside of it. So we try to make sure that we're maintaining that relatively limited scope. We do take on projects that are relatively self-contained. We know that there are some projects that are going to be massive projects. And for right now, as we're just entering year 2 of our funnel, we're still focusing on things that are discrete enough to be able to be worked on within some reasonable amount of time. So, if we get a project that is like, fix the word health, and like health touches 5,000 subject headings, we're not going to be able to do that. So we want to make sure that the projects that we do, at least right now, are sort of manageable, both by the volunteer effort and by the capacity of LC. They're, of course, always short-staffed, and we have to, make sure that we are working with other funnels and with LC's priorities to ensure that we, are fitting in our projects into where their priorities are. We also take on projects that are interesting to the members of the funnel. So we're just volunteers. We're not getting specifically paid for this work, although some of us are lucky enough to do this on our work time. And so the topics have to be relatively interesting and relatively compelling in order for the members of the funnel to do this work. So, that can mean that there's a lot of work, I think, within our funnel on disability specifically, because a lot of people within the funnel have interests in that area, and especially interest in improving the terminology being used. So, if it is not necessarily a super of interest to any of the members, it might not get picked up. So that's why, of course, we need more members of the funnels who have different varied interests, so that we can take on the projects that aren't, super exciting to anyone in the funnel right this second. So with that, I'm gonna, pivot to we need your help. We would really encourage people to get onto the email list. We have an email list where we have calendar invites. We have meetings on the 4th Thursday of the month regularly. 3 p.m. Central is the time on that. It's about an hour. So people ask what's the commitment, and it's about an hour. And then if you take on projects within that, it might be an extra hour or 2, depending on how much research you do. So really, it's the workload is pretty manageable. It's at least an hour a month, but maybe 2 or 3, something like that. And it's all dependent on your own schedule and what you have the capacity for. Sometimes I don't have as much time to devote to the funnel in 1 month, but I do in the next month. So I get a lot more done that next month. So we really encourage you to get in touch with us. That you can email us. That goes to my co-chair and I, Kat Ballack, and I, who's at Rochester and also in Minnesota. So um, medical subject headings at gmail.com is the email there. And our funnel webpage is a great place to check out if you're sort of wondering more about the funnel. It has a link to our Trello page, which has a lot of our resources linked out. And so it has a lot more information about how does any of this process work? And, like what sort of things do you need in order to make these changes happen? So we have a lot of resources there. So I would encourage you to check that out if that's of interest to you at all. I also want to just briefly talk about the LIPA funnel. And I talked about this, and Tina Gross is in here, who's going to be doing the next presentation in this webinar series, and is also a member of LIPA. So LIPA does a lot of work related to, of course, Latin American Indigenous peoples of the Americas, related to these headings. And one of the things that, if you're interested in hearing about the new LC Indigenous Terminology Project, and you're interested in hearing from the project manager at LC of this work, they get regular reports. So if you're interested in that, join the LIPA funnel, go to those meetings, and you'll be able to hear a lot more about what LC is planning, sort of the foundational work that Sarah, the project manager, is doing, ensuring that she's reaching out to a wide variety of Indigenous peoples within the US specifically, and like talking about some of the big heading problems like Indians of North America. But also just sort of, again, laying that groundwork of that, making sure that there's a consensus on board. So if you're interested in that project, I would really encourage you to join the LIPA and just go to those meetings. I also would like to point out, just because this is one of my little projects that I am so proud of, that the LIPA funnel did, something called the best practices and authority work relating to Indigenous nations in the US. So if you do name authority work or subject authority work, it's a great document. It's seven or 8 pages. And it asks you questions to sort of frame, your own expertise and perspective when it comes to Indigenous peoples. It's mostly aimed at settlers, so non-Indigenous peoples. And it asks you questions like here, like what's on the screen right now. So it asks you to sort of think about, who are the Indigenous peoples within your institution? How can they be included in discussions that you have around, say, changing subject headings or making name authority records? It asks you questions about, like the relationships that your institution has with local Indigenous nations, and how can you build relationships that are meaningful and sustainable. So this is just a little plug for, the LIPA funnel being really important and doing some really exciting work, and also that best practices document, which I think is really valuable for people to read over if they're doing any sort of Indigenous related work, especially as settlers. So right then, like I want to sort of leave a lot of time for questions, but I do want to sort of say that if you're interested in this critical cataloging work, there's a lot going on right now. And how do you know about any of this that's happening? What are other libraries doing to improve subject heading and classification? What are scholars writing about about bias within cataloging and classification? What are the hot topics being discussed in the profession? What volunteers opportunities are there to help make change? And this is my plug for my own blog / newsletter, Crit Catinate. So I do a monthly roundup of critical cataloging news, and hopefully news you can use. And it talks a lot about some of the projects that funnels have done, but also the projects that just individual libraries have done. So if there's a blog post out there where a library has talked about some of the work that they've done about critical cataloging. Hopefully I find it in my searching that month, and I put it on Critcatinate. So I think it's a really valuable resource for people who are interested in keeping up with what's happening, getting ideas about about what they might do in their own local institutions. And I'm hoping that, like you can always feel welcome to submit your own interest stories to me to share within Critcatinate. I'm really grateful for any and find a lot of value when people, approach me and say, would you share this and concatenate? And I'd be excited to do that. I get several hundred views every month, so it's, it gets some pretty good stats, and I've heard a lot of people say that it's a valuable resource for them. With that, I'm going to wrap it up. I do think that whatever you end up doing, I would like to encourage you to get involved. There's so many different ways to get involved. The medical library, the medical funnel may or may not be your thing. But I would encourage you to think about how you can make things happen, how you can get involved. I always, when I was doing work as one of the editors for Dewey, I talked a lot about how we sort of need to move the conversation beyond how this system sucks, how Dewey sucks or how LCSH sucks. And we need to say, well, what are we going to do to improve these systems? Are we going to work to, make these systems better? Are we going to work to provide alternative vocabularies? Are we going to use local headings within our systems? Any of those are super valid choices. And we just need to move beyond just complaining about things and then not taking action. So I hope you agree with me on that. And I hope that you are finding lots of ways to get involved, that sort of that you vibe with, that you are finding useful. There's lots and lots of ways to get involved. And I would love to be a resource for you if I can be of service to you. So please feel free to reach out at violetfox@gmail.com. I'm happy to talk with you, and I'm hoping that you have a lot of questions for me today. So I'll leave it up to Alyssa at this point. I'll stop sharing, Alyssa.
Okay, audience, now is your chance to ask questions. And Violet, it looks like we already have one. This one is from Amanda Campbell, and it says, I'm curious what sources your group uses for its research, especially when it comes to terms used in medical sources that might differ from terms used by individuals. Often activists in disability space are way ahead of the official medical terminology. So how do you prioritize these different sources with your suggestions, thinking about potential distance between up-to-date and preferred? And thanks for a great presentation.
Yeah, Amanda, what a great question. Thanks so much. And that's definitely something we grapple with. And it's something that we grapple with not only in like which resources to choose, but also which projects that we should focus on. Because, of course, there's a huge amount of things we could be focusing on, right? There's a ton of work to be done within both LCSH and MESH. And honestly, the projects that get our attention are the ones where there's, really outdated terminology, right? Terminology that's just not acceptable anymore. And so that's sort of right now where we're focusing our efforts. And I think there's plenty of that in both LCSH and MESH, where like things honestly like cerebral palsy, where you sort of go, oh, that's not right. That doesn't sound right at all. And it doesn't sound right because it hasn't been used for 50 years, even in the literature, right? So a lot of our energy goes towards, sort of this more offensive terminology, and not necessarily things, like it's more it's a matter of what moves us individually to be able to, want to devote the time and energy to changing it. But also definitely within the resources, and I hope Puck and other folks from the funnel will chime in as well, that, we do really look towards organizations that are run by people with these syndromes or disabilities themselves. So, if we're going to put forward a proposal, we're going to use the terminology used by groups and individuals with whatever medical condition or without whatever disability. So, we're gonna, when you do research to find literary warrant, to find what is being used in the literature, you can interpret it in lots of different ways. You can do things like n-grams to see the usage of over time and that sort of thing. So that's something that we often do within LCSH to say, what's the usage over time? It has this terminology, fallen out of favor within the literature, both medical literature and just published works, right? Published books. So we do a lot of that searching both within PubMed and within WorldCat and Google itself. So sort of trying to identify trends. But we also, again, like the people in this funnel are really dedicated to doing this work right. And we do really, if we can, try to say, what's the terminology that's being, the own voices terminology, and use that and see if there's evidence for that within the medical literature as well. So we're gonna try to sort of use both, like the own voices and then also the medical literature to make a case for using the own voices, terminology. And if that case isn't there, maybe we drop it for a couple of years until it is there, because we don't want to necessarily do the work to say, well, this is what medicine the doctors are using, but the people are using this. And we're not going to necessarily want to do that in 2 or 3 years. So it's a matter of also waiting enough for enough time to go by to see if there's a case to be made to use the not right terminology, the terminology that people with these conditions are using themselves. So it's sort of a feeling it out. There's a lot of investigating that we do within the funnel that doesn't end up being a proposal. For example, we had a proposal. We had somebody ask us about cannabis and marijuana and how there's a lot of inconsistency within those terms in both LCSH and MESH. And guess what? There's a lot of inconsistency in those terms in every single resource that we looked at. So because there's not really a clear pattern, there's I trust me, we've looked at so much research for this, and we've just decided at this point this is just not a project that is going to be able to be like have any sort of reasonable guiding definition for us in order to make it more consistent with an LCSH. At some point, I think we will get back to it, but we have to sort of wait for the literature to catch up to sort of decide on a specific terminology. So we're just kind of wait it out. Again, everything within the funnel that we do doesn't end up in a proposal, but the work that we do, we capture that work. We document that work, and those are all publicly available documents, so that when we come back to it or somebody comes back to it in 3 years, that work is there. They don't have to start from scratch. So we might just be able to scare them off and say, "Oh, don't do this. We've already tried it." Or we might say, "Actually, it's been a couple of years. Let's do some updated research and see if we can tackle this now." So it's a complicated question. It's a complicated answer, but just to say, we do try to prioritize, people's own voices, and whether that can happen or not within the literature is sort of like a touchy thing that we try to work out and try to figure something out.
Thank you so much. There's a lot of like insider baseball. We just
Yes, it is. Yeah, and the details are very compelling to us. So it is insider baseball, but it is we do want to be transparent about it, that like
yeah.
if you give us a proposal, we may or may not be able to do it, but for lots of different reasons. And so it is honestly, you can tell that I'm very excited about it. It's fun to think about, and it's fun to try to narrow down what we do to the most productive, making the most productive use of our time and energy. So it's a joy to get to work with such a dedicated, great group of folks who are sort of willing to figure that sort of thing out with us as we are moving forward in the funnel.
Cool. So this question, I'm not sure if you'll have an answer to it, but Zachary
Yeah.
Fannin asks, how long ago was cripples in Library of Congress subject headings, now a former heading under people with disabilities? And then also a comment, my sister has CP and neither she nor I have heard of cerebral palsied.
Yeah, isn't that cerebral palsy is such terminology, and I think it was pretty frequently used in the 50s and 60s. And so it was, ported into like it was brought into LCSH electronically in the 1980s when everything was ported over from before the 1980s. But yeah, no, it's quite old. So we're really excited that was able to be changed. And LC, of course, had no problem with it. They just, hadn't had the time to get to it. Nobody had brought it to their attention. I really don't know the history of the term cripples in LCSH. I bet you somebody's written a pretty good paper on that. So I'd have to look. Part of the issue here is that LC in the past has not been very good about documenting the changes in history of their subject headings. Mesh has been a little bit better about that, and LC is now within the last few years actually started making history notes within MARC records for subject headings to say that it was changed from this to this at a specific date. So that's really helpful now. We don't have that information easily accessible online for things that were before just a few years ago when LC started making this change. I have sort of a guess of when it was because I see in the MARC record, I'm looking at the MARC record for the subject heading for people with disabilities right now. And I see that it was changed at some point in the year 2001. And so I don't know if that was a change, that might have been a change from physically handicapped to people with disabilities. It may have been the time when it was changed over from cripples. So I'm not sure when 2001 was, if that was when that terminology changed. I bet you the literature has some pretty interesting things to say about this. There's so much interesting work that's being done on disability-related vocabulary that's really hard to keep up with. So I encourage people to share within the chat if you know about good stuff that's happening. There's some interesting things specifically within LCSH, and I know that there's a really good article, and I'm forgetting what the article is, and so I'm hoping someone will remember what it is, talking about social disabilities, and I'm trying to think of what some of the other disabilities, mental disabilities. So there's an LCSH for mental disabilities, and that's really not a term that people, like a term of art in medicine. Medical or mental disabilities is sort of like, what does that mean? And so what ended up happening, let's see, I'm gonna look up. I have this in a document and I'm just gonna drive me crazy. I can't find it right this second. Oh yeah, mentally ill notes. Hang on just a second here. So we did some work around people with mental disabilities. Um,
Well, while you're
and
looking for that, I could just say,
yes, I would love that.
Anne Victor just wanted to give you a little bit of advice. ACRL EDI committee had a poster session earlier this month about their EDI project directory through ALA. And if you're doing this critical cataloging work locally, you should consider submitting your work to the directory. And she
Oh, yeah, that sounds terrific. Thank you. That's really helpful.
posted a link to
Um,
their FAQ.
Yeah, and that's work that the PCC DEI committee that I'm on, it's called the ADIBA Advisory Committee, would also be interested in. So I'm really glad that you all are doing that work and that we can share that. So thanks. I'll try to find ways that PCC can also share that work and collaborate and contribute to that. So thank you. That's a really helpful tip. Thank you for that. So people with mental disabilities was originally added to LCSH as mentally handicapped. And so then there was this change that everything with the word handicap got changed to disabilities. So for example, mentally handicapped got changed to people with mental disabilities, but that's not, again, a term that people know what that means. We think that it sort of means intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities by what is underneath it, by the structural hierarchy. But it really does need a complete overhaul in both the terminology used and sort of the hierarchy. So again, that's like a huge down the line project. There's also people with social disabilities, which if you think about that, what does that mean? And what it generally means is it's people who had cultural deprivation. So again, a term that sort of maybe was made sense in the 80s and 90s and maybe makes a little bit less sense now. But people with social disabilities really needs to be removed from the disability hierarchy. So there, again, that's a big project down the line. We would love to have more people with, who would be interested in taking on that sort of work. Just need honestly more hands to do that work. So there's some exciting things. So been some great literature written on it. It's a really interesting, fascinating area of discussion.
Neat. Wow. I don't see any more questions in the chat. So if anyone has any more questions, you are getting some thank yous for your answers, Violet.
Okay, good.
People are appreciating.
And I hope I'm not like too jazzed about the nerdery of this that I'm hoping I'm making sense about. It's very, I mean, it's exciting work. And again, we get to work with a great group of people. I think the people in the funnels are just doing incredible work, and I'm grateful for the chance to talk about, this work. I don't think people outside of PCC leadership really get a chance to hear about it very often. So I think PCC has been doing more work to sort of share the work that's done within funnels within PCC itself. So if you're on the PCC email list, but if you're like a regular cataloger and not necessarily a part of PCC work, you don't necessarily know that this work is happening, and it's just so vital. And so I hope that this inspires people to learn more about that work that's happening, and either get involved with the funnel or get involved with some way to make that happen. I'm also happy to talk about, what sort of things people are doing locally in their catalogs, and the things that people want to do locally in their catalogs to make changes.
Cool. Well, Margaret Joyce says, this is the time for nerding out about this.
Yes, this is a safe space for.
Excellent. Oh, actually, Zachary Fannin wrote, I also find it interesting disabilities has used fors, handicaps, and impairment when there are distinctions between them. So,
Absolutely. So
yeah.
there's a lot of conflation, a lot of elation between terminology that probably at this point shouldn't be. Um, there's I would suggest, and I'll put in an article here that's called "Handicapped Has Been Canceled." It's by Bree Watson and Beck Schaefer. So they did a really great job of this. I'm putting the link in the chat right now. And this is a 2023 article in the journal First Monday. So it's talking about the terminology of disability in cultural heritage institutions, including libraries and things. So there's a lot. Again, it's a fascinating thing. There has been some pretty good research on it. I think there's lots more to be done to sort of unearth sort of the patterns of what's happening here. So really fascinating stuff, and grateful for people who are interested in diving more into it with us.
Oh gosh, thank you so much, Violet. If anyone here was curious about the cartoons that you're seeing on
Oh,
this
yes.
slide, they're from the Hennepin County Library Cataloging Bulletin, which has been digitized and is now available in the Hennepin County Library digital collections. And there's a link there. You could learn more about this digitization project by watching the recordings from earlier presenters in this series. And so I'll also put that link here. If you would like to take a survey, we're always looking for feedback. It'll take you about 5 minutes or less. Thank you all for attending today. I wanted to let you know that Minitex is going to continue exploring this topic more this spring, and you can find more information about future presentations at this link here for registration. And there's a link here to a zine from the MLA presentation that inspired this webinar series, connecting with our radical history and cataloging. And that's actually on the cataloging lab. So if you're checking out Violet's website, you might run into this cool zine.
Yeah, that wasn't that fun? So I hope people have seen the zine or are checking it out now, because it just it really gives a great overview of why this is not just a fad.
Totally. Absolutely. Um, yeah, so thank you all for attending, and I look forward to seeing you all at future webinars. I am going to stop this recording now when I find that button.